Well, seeing the slide presentation brought back many memories of not just experiences that I'd missed, but that I'd heard about through Bob's storytelling. He served as a professor for several years with the International Institute for Christian Studies. And we were just a young organization when Bob and I first met in the early 90s. We were just 3 years old, and we'd been founded to place Christian professors in public universities outside of North America. And I met Bob and Inga and Chris in a dilapidated old Soviet-style dormitory in very depressing circumstances in Kiev, Ukraine. And that was the beginning of our relationship. He was teaching at the Kiev Pedagogical Institute, which later welcomed other ICS professors. And he had spent his life doing what we were trying to encourage others to do. And he taught at a long list of universities, which we've just heard. So with that kind of background, when Bob and I met, it was something like maybe when Abraham and Melchizedek met. They were finishing each other's sentences. They were thinking the same kind of things. And even though there was 29 years between us, we were committed to the same goals. And there was an instantaneous, unbreakable bond and friendship between us. So he became a dear friend and co-laborer, a man with uncanny cross-cultural skills who always wanted to be pushing out the horizons and across the frontiers for the kingdom. In fact, I was just going back this morning and found one of the later emails that I received from Bob in 2004, in which he had represented ISS in Tehran, Iran. And his email was urgent. Daryl, you've got to send professors to Tehran, and here's what we need them in. And he closes it by saying, after this is 2004, after this stint in Tehran, I feel I'm becoming a missionary all over again. Well, that was typical Bob. Bob became like a second father to me. In fact, in 1993, my son Lance and I went to Kazakhstan to visit him. And little did we know, when we arrived, we were met by one of his Kazakh colleagues who said, "Your colleague, Dr. Bob, is in the hospital." Well, we rushed to the hospital and found him there with a broken shoulder. And he was in the best hospital in Almaty, the one that was reserved for the Communist Party elite, you know, in the interest of classless society. They always picked the best for themselves. But his shoulder was not healing. And the bone kept popping up and poking out his skin. And Bob quipped, "I hate it when that happens." And of course, we kind of hated to see it happen too. I'm not sure who hated which the most. But Bob, that very first afternoon, he said, "Now, Daryl, you cannot tell Inga about this. You cannot tell her about my hospitalization. She'll just worry about me, and I won't help any." Well, we talked all afternoon that evening, and that night I can remember tossing and turning all night on that narrow, uncomfortable Russian bed there in Kazakhstan. And when I got up in the morning, I had made my decision. I would exercise my executive authority as the head of IICS and as Bob's boss, if anybody was ever his boss, and order him to leave with me and Lance in a couple of days and get him back to the United States where he could get care. The decision was made. So the next morning, I marched into the hospital room, expressed my concern, and announced my executive decision. Well, all of you knew Bob well enough to know he wasn't fazed by that. He wasn't going to be ordered around by some peep-squeak executive. He looked at me like, "Do you really think you're going to tell me what to do?" And he said, "Listen here, girl. I have had operations and broken bones, and I've lost body parts all over the world. And I can't remember, the Inga would have to fill in the details. I've lost my gallbladder in Tehran, and I broke something in Argentina, and I did something else in Lebanon, and I have malaria here," and the list went on and on. And he says, "Besides, I'm needing to brush up on my Russian. I want to be fluent, and none of the doctors here speak English. So I'm in a perfect place to perfect my Russian. I've got plenty of time. I can't do anything else. And I've got to figure out what they're saying to me. So I'm staying right here, and I'm not leaving with you and Lance in a couple of days. The matter is settled, and you're not going to tell Inga. Well, rebuffed and feeling more like a grandchild than a CEO, I paused, swallowed, accepted defeat, but then I protested, "You can't control what I say to Inga when I get back. She deserves to know and she will know from me, and you can work that out with her." But this little encounter, one of many wonderful memories with Bob, typifies his spirit. First, he was determined to push across the frontiers to tell others about our risen Lord. He was persistent. Stubborn's another word for it. He was tough. He wasn't going to let a little thing like a broken shoulder slow him down in fulfilling the Great Commission. And he was global in his vision. He could have been settling at that point for a comfortable tenured position somewhere in the U.S., but he couldn't rest. As long as he knew there were millions of people, now 2 billion people, who have never heard the name of Jesus, he had to press on. Yesterday on a flight out from Kansas City, I went back over his book, which you really, if you haven't read it, you've got to read it. And just realized this is the quintessential missionary. He was highly respected and loved within our organization, the International Institute for Christian Studies. In fact, a couple of colleagues sent words that I'll just share with you briefly. Danny McCain, the founder of ICS, wrote this: "Dr. Robert Young was a great challenge to me personally because he was one of the few people who had been doing what I had envisioned long before I met him. He demonstrated that a committed Christian could have a positive impact on a public university. Not only did he demonstrate over his whole career what ICS was all about, but he took me under his wing in some sense to encourage me and help me and challenge me to do more for the kingdom. As long as he was healthy, he kept up a steady stream of correspondence with me. He was always encouraging and affirming in these emails. In fact, I couldn't help but think, we are still working with colleagues that he led to Christ in Brazil, and they are launching their own movement of academic Christian leaders all across Brazil, and we're still working with them because of Bob's work." Danny goes on to say, "We are sorry to lose this good man, but it is easier to release a man when you know that man has made a powerful impact on the world. There are few places where one can make a greater impact than in higher education, and there are few Christian academics who have made a greater impact on higher education globally than Dr. Robert Young." And then Dan Clendenin, who taught in Russia at the same time Bob was teaching there, who taught at Moscow State University in their Department of Atheism. He said, "I loved Bob's his wit and his ways, his global passion, and his unbeatable spirit. I always felt about Bob, hey, I want some of what you got. Blessed are those who die in the Lord." Inga, we've been honored to serve with you and Bob over these years alongside of them. David, Stephen, Lisa, Chris, please know that the ICS family is praying for you during this time of transition, of celebration of his commemoration, and we honor Bob as one of the great missionary heroes of the 21st century.